Hello YouTube, my name is Zach, and today I'm going to be analyzing Jorn Lande. Now, Jorn has done a bunch of different projects all over the place. Right now he's kind of doing his own solo deal, so I'm not going to list everything he's done here, but if you're familiar with him, you know that he's done a whole lot of stuff. A quick disclaimer to those of you who've never seen my content, this video is made strictly for educational purposes. This is not a reaction video. I've already thoroughly analyzed Jorn prior to this recording. I'm a professional voice teacher at a music studio in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've taught hundreds of voices, both male and female, in most genres from the ages of 5 to 60. I base my analyses upon academically sourced, health-based principles. If you want to learn a bit more about the basis of my pedagogy, I encourage you to check out nats.org and peruse the Journal of Singing. It has been the authoritative source of all things vocal pedagogy related in the United States for the last 75 years. Artistry and technique are equally important in singing, and throughout my research of the YouTube landscape, I've found that there is a much greater emphasis on artistry across the board than technique, and I aim to counterbalance that with some more objective commentary. As such, my videos tend to de-emphasize the artistic intention of the singer. My doing so does not invalidate the singer's skill or efficacy in displaying his or her artistic ideals, but perhaps instead offers a different lens by which to view the process of singing and phonation. I seek out what I call teachable moments. As a result, this video will contain both praise and constructive criticism. I humbly encourage you to view the critiques from a strictly educational paradigm and not as an affront on Jorn himself. My goal ultimately is to help you learn about your own singing. So this is Perfect Strangers. He did a cover of the Deep Purple song, and I'm not terribly familiar with his body of work, so I did a cursory glance at a lot of his material, and I felt like this video was the best balance of him singing where I can see it and understand it with a decent quality video with something that I was already somewhat familiar with. Really quickly before we get started, I hate to do this, but I have to break the video up whenever I play back the recording. Copyright reasons and whatnot. If I don't, I'll get strikes and, possibly get my channel removed and that kind of thing. So it's just easier if I break the videos up. I know that it only shows about 10 to 15 seconds of singing at a time. I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do. If I own the licenses to this stuff, I could. As a quick overview, here are 3 strengths and weaknesses to Jorn singing. 3 strengths would be that he uses excellent fundamentals universally, which refer to things like breath support, intonation, placement, and vowel selection. He effectively uses vowel modification throughout the upper end of his range, and he has very good use of legato. And 3 weaknesses or suboptimal things that he does is 1, he uses suboptimal posture in order to aid his performances, which I don't recommend for inexperienced singers. He also uses a lot of vocal rasp, which isn't a weakness per se, but it's not something that I actively recommend due to its phonatory nature, and I'll get into that in a bit. And 3rd, he utilizes glottal onsets a lot at the beginnings of his phrases that utilize that raspy sound. So, without further ado, here is Perfect Strangers, performed by Jorn Lande. So one thing to point out at the very beginning of all this with his singing is that he has extremely good legato. And what I mean by legato, if you've never seen my content before, legato is that sound of connectedness between note to note. And legato is important because it makes our singing more closely relate to the way that we speak. When we communicate, our ideas and our thoughts and our words sort of blend together into singular phrases. And so we have this subconscious method of connecting each word to one another so that there's a sense of continuity. The easiest example would be if I started talking like this all the time. My phrases don't seem to have the same continuity. They don't sound as continuous. They don't sound as logical. There's just something that's not quite right, something that's kind of broken up about it. Our ears are attuned to hearing the legato sound as a pleasing thing that we can connect to and relate to. So when you find a singer that connects his phrases together really well, he's utilizing legato technique. And so through that, we can easily relate to it. And it usually results in the singer being a very good communicator. The singer is usually very good at connecting entire musical phrases together. Next time you listen to a singer, pay attention to how frequently they breathe or how frequently they break time up in between each of their notes that they sing. And you'll find that it's usually a little bit harder to connect with those sort of singers. It's this kind of intangible thing. But across the vocal education spectrum, it's just sort of universally considered that more legato is better. If you go back and listen to the phrases that he sung prior to this, you'll hear that there's this sense of connectedness through all of it. Even if you sing, "Can you remember my name?" However it goes, I think I'm singing an octave below him, but that whole thing, it connects. You don't hear, "Do you remember my name?" It doesn't sound like a bunch of notes stuck beside one another. It sounds like someone singing a phrase, and that's an example of very good legato. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. You see him moving his body around a lot, doing a lot of shifting of his posture. Well, I mentioned in my little list at the beginning that he's using suboptimal posture to aid his performance. And so what I mean by that is when you learn to sing, it's very important to align yourself vertically, because basically the entire process of singing is one kind of tube that connects the breath to the throat up to the mouth, and then there's a single kind of curve that happens at the side of the mouth when the sound comes out. But from the diaphragm and the lungs up to the vocal tract, I mean, really, it's all one straight line. So the best, most efficient vocal coordination comes from a vertical alignment between the diaphragm and the vocal tract. So when you do things that disrupt that, like bending over or leaning back, that kind of thing, that alignment sort of dissipates. It kind of goes away. Now, as singers develop, it gets easier to be able to sort of mitigate that a little bit. Like if you watch even a lot of modern operas, you'll find opera singers doing things like lying on the floor, like bending over, sitting in chairs, that kind of thing. Their posture's all over the place. So there are ways to sing with poor posture that are efficient and effective, but I would not recommend someone who's developing the voice, like if you're watching this video to learn about your singing, I would not start it from the perspective of using poor posture, because it's going to make the entire process of phonating more difficult. And as you get better at breath support and learning how to sustain things and learning how to sing with, the proper upright posture, which is most closely related to our natural standing position anyway, you'll be able to sort of add in little things to your performance. So Jorn is extremely good at the fundamentals, and that's kind of going back to the points that I made. The fact that he's so good at the breath support, the fact that he's so good at using the proper posture when he needs to, he can kind of get away with using some of the suboptimal stuff in lieu of creating a better performance. Okay, so I want to take a second and stop to talk about rasp a little bit, because as the song's developing, he's applying more and more of that rasp to his singing sound. I know there's been a ton of debate, and I get a lot of flack on my channel for not coming out and talking about how to make raspy sounds with the voice, and, I don't actively advocate for it. But the core of it is that while we are trying to study vocal rasp and we're trying to better understand it, right now, while there are examples of singers that have been able to have careers using it, there are far more examples of singers that have destroyed their voices in using it. And I know that leads to the concept of, well, there's the correct, healthy way to do it. But the problem is that we don't really have any peer review that's conclusive that shows any healthy way of doing it. There are studies in place, and there are a couple of institutions that are trying to submit some things for peer review to help standardize the process of using rasp and using vocal distortion, as some people call it. But as it stands right now, there's nothing conclusively peer reviewed that's been done in a longitudinal fashion that shows that these types of singing styles are sustainable. So as a result, I don't recommend people to do them. That does not mean that you can't go out and do it. And that does not mean that I tell my students not to do it. I just say, look, I can't teach you how to do that. I can teach you healthy things to do, and then you can go explore your voice on your own. But I can't help you with that stuff, and I'm not going to teach you something that I can't help you with, because I try to teach methods that promote vocal sustainability and vocal health that I know for sure with evidence I can get behind. The day that a study is out that shows a conclusively sustainable method of creating vocal rasp and distortion is the day that I will begin teaching it. There are lots of teachers who claim out there that they've got the method, but the thing is, when you put any of that up next to peer review, it falls flat. Most of those people will not submit their material to peer review, and pretty much everyone else who has been shot down. But we may have had some recent breakthroughs on the subject, and if we have, then I'm all for it, because I love the sound of it. I think it sounds cool, and I'm all for freedom vocally, and I'd love for singers to be able to have a way to use vocal rasp in their music without damaging their voices. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. For now, I'm not going to spend this whole video talking about vocal rasp. I just wanted to get that out of the way so that we can move on from it. So one thing that I didn't put in my 3 strengths that I probably should have added in retrospect is that Jorn has very good tonal consistency from the bottom to the top of the range. And a lot of his singing here is a good example of that. Now, he uses a lot of glissando, which is like the slippy, slidey kind of thing. The oh, that kind of thing. And in the, strictly classical sense, that's considered pretty sloppy and unrefined, but I use it as a teaching tool myself for my students, so I don't walk around saying, oh, you use glissando, therefore you're not a good singer. That's ridiculous. Now, there are certain settings where the glissando isn't called for, like, certain romantic, baroque, classical pieces, stuff like that. You don't necessarily want to use a lot of glissando, but in stuff like this, it's totally fine. One of the biggest benefits of glissando is that it keeps your vocal folds fully closed from the point that you start the glissando to the point that you end it. So what that could do is really aid your tonal consistency from the bottom to the top of your range. And in conjunction with Jorn's really good vowel modification, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, and his tonal consistency, if he needs to use glissandos to make that happen, I'm totally fine with it, especially considering that this isn't classical music and I'm not going to hold him to that standard. But it's worth pointing out that he has a very similar tone when he sings his low notes up into his high notes. And this last little clip that I played was an excellent example of his tonal consistency. Tonal consistency is done by having good breath support. It's done by having full chord closure, which means you don't have too much air through the sound, that kind of thing. And it also involves shaping the vocal tract in a way that's conducive to maintaining the same type of sound that you're creating from the bottom to the top. And so throughout his range, he shows a very strong aptitude toward that. And I think the glissandos actually help him in that case. Right there on laughing, when he did that, you heard that vibrato come through. And I've talked a lot about vibrato in the past and the different types. I want to go ahead and point out that if you're looking for an example of a natural incidental vibrato, that was it. And you can tell because there was no manipulation of any kind in his voice, and the vibrato was fast and somewhat narrow. It didn't sound like it was being manufactured like a sine wave. It didn't sound like that. It did not affect the tone of his sound, so the sound of his voice stayed exactly the same throughout the vibrato, and he didn't make any physical motions to cause the vibrato to happen. So in all likelihood, that was a natural incidental vibrato that comes from a sustainable, healthy singing method. So very nice. I just wanted to point that out to give all of you an example of incidental vibrato, because I've gotten that question a lot. As the spirits appear. One thing to point out there that's kind of a negative is when he said, oh, your life, he kind of did, yeah. He kind of did this nasal sort of thing. And what I've noticed through watching him is that a lot of times when he does that raspy sound, he puts nasal resonance along with it. So there could be some kind of correlation between the method that he's using to create the rasp and the placement of the resonance. For the most part, his placement of his resonance has been very good, which is why all of his vowels sound so clear and sound so ringy, and you can tell what words he's singing because he's using the actual vowels that are used to say the word rather than changing the vowel to be something, not related to what he's actually saying at all, which is a very common problem that you run into, especially in metal singers. They'll change the vowels to something like all over the place that doesn't really match the word just because they're trying to get sound out. Jorn doesn't do that, which is another indicator that he has very good fundamentals. I don't know if he's had any vocal training or anything like that, but I would not be surprised at all if he did, because he does so many things technically very well. So there's a couple of things to point out in this phrase that demonstrate a lot. So at the beginning of the phrase, he went, ah. That is a very, very hard glottal onset. And I've talked about onsets a lot in the past. And quickly, for those who don't know what they are, that's the approach that the folds take when you begin a word that begins with a vowel. Like there's the glottal, the aspirate, and the modal. Aspirate's very airy. Modal is kind of like if we speak it like the word open, open. And then the glottal is like, open like that. Well, his glottal onset was very strong at the beginning of it. Maybe he utilizes glottal onsets to make that raspy sound, but as I've demonstrated many times before, the glottal onset actually is physically destructive to the voice. And really quickly, before I get too off the rails with this, I looked at some of his more recent performances in the past couple of years, and he is starting to show some vocal decline in that when he does the raspy sound, there isn't as much tone in the sound. It's more just rasp than actual phonation, which tells me that throughout time, what's happened is his raspy sound that he's created has kind of made the folds not close as fully. And now the repercussion of it is that it's very difficult for his folds to close at all when he makes the raspy sound. Across the board, his recent performances in the past couple of years are still very good, but the rasp is definitely taking a toll on the way that he phonates to a degree. I didn't do something more recent for that very purpose. I wanted to show something where he kind of had a very nice balance of the rasp and still having good tone in the sound. Another thing to point out is at the end of this phrase, when he sung the O vowel, he actually moved up in the voice. The pitch went up and he moved it to an oo. And that's an example of vowel modification. Kind of if you go, oh, it goes from an O to the sort of oo sound. That's really a generally very good way of navigating the higher points of your range. Most of the time when you travel through the passaggio, which is the point where the voice goes from the modal or the speaking chest voice up into the head voice, you want to narrow out the vowels. And it's a pretty complex subject that involves the shaping of the vocal tract. It's kind of outside the scope of this video, but for the most part, you want to kind of close the vowels a little bit more, close the embouchure, lip shaping, that kind of thing a little bit more when you move up into the head voice. And once you get past it, you can open up a little bit more. But he does a very good job of showing that when he kind of gets in that sort of the close to the mixed voice register, he closes up his embouchures. It just shows a really nice awareness of his own vocal technique. And he's found a sense of freedom. There's kind of this irony in singing that people think you have to control everything, but really the freer you are as a singer, the more control that you have. So he's kind of developed this sense of freedom that's given him a lot of control up and down his voice. He's really a fantastic singer, I think, and this video does a good job of demonstrating his strengths very well, I think. One thing I find notable about him, this is a really quick note, is a lot of times, one thing I find notable about him is just a really quick note. A lot of times when I watch metal singers do this kind of stuff with the rasp and the distortion, they get really tense and things are like tight. He's not. He keeps things very free and relaxed, which is definitely distinctive. He actually reminds me a little bit of Ronnie James Dio in that sense, that Dio seemed to have this almost uncanny way of keeping things very free, even though he was doing this raspy stuff. Some people are just born with the ability to make these sounds easily, I think, and Jorn is definitely an example of that. If there were ever a way to model yourself in that style, like if you can do the raspy stuff, I would say that Jorn and Dio both are probably very good models of how to navigate singing in those methods, because so much of the other elements of their technique are so good. I think that Jorn's lack of tension is notable here. Now, I've seen some of his more recent performances where he has a little bit more tension, but in this time, I think this is like around 2010 when he did this, sometime around maybe 2011. No tension. Very good. Like, the less tension when you sing, the better. And even when he did that night, when he did that thing, the embouchure stayed consistent, that legato was there. I mean, just really solid singing technique. You don't find this very much in metal singers, especially. Like, there's been a lot of singers I've analyzed up to this point where I've had to find ways to praise their technique. This is not hard at all. He just does everything so well. It's consistent, even connected. I feel like a broken record because I just keep using the same terminology over and over for him, but he really does demonstrate excellent control, excellent technique. He's a really good singer. Yeah, I mean, there's just not enough good things to say about this guy's technique. I listened to that whole phrase, and every word is distinguishable. His lines are consistently connected. You don't hear breaks in his sound. His tone stays consistent despite the raspy stuff. It's just a model of excellent singing technique, aside from the things that I've told you that he's deliberately choosing to aid his performance. So, outside of, me trying to teach you how to do the rasps thing, I would say that if you're going to go into metal singing, follow this guy's example in that he's got consistent tone across his range. He's got great breath support. And the breath support is demonstrated by that tonal consistency. If he didn't have good breath support, there wouldn't be a steady stream of air for the tone to carry across the range. Just excellent all across the board. And I don't want to go reaction video with this, just giving the guy a lot of praise, because I've already made clear the things that I feel like are, unhealthy for the voice. Outside of those things, though, he does a whole lot right. So he's really a good model in that sense. So there's good and bad about that high note. He started out that with a very hard glottal onset. And I do believe that glottal onset has something to do with the way that he does the rasp. Now, no matter what the debate is about how healthy rasp is, again, the glottal stuff is extremely unhealthy for you. Doing that when you begin a vowel is not good for your voice. Putting that kind of pressure on the bottom of your folds and letting them like pop together like that is not good for you, and it will lead to vocal issues in time. 99.9% of the time. So I would not recommend doing that. Here's another technical thing that he does really well. A lot of times when you find singers that use these words with like hard R's, like strangers, you'll hear them sing that strangers like that. Well, with strangers, he used an vowel, which is definitely the better way to navigate words that end in consonants, because it lets the vowel sing more. That's just another technical thing he did really well. I mean, he's just demonstrating all these little things that tell me like this dude knows what he's doing. This is kind of what I listen for when I hear singers, and I know that they kind of know what's up when they do the little things, those little details. This guy's good. He's really good. And really, that's about it in the video. There's one other phrase where he sings perfect strangers, but I mean, that's all he does, and it wasn't really anything notable. It would just be me saying more of the same thing. So I hope that helped you learn a little bit about the process of him singing. I will give my personal opinion. This is just my opinion. I like to give my opinions at the end. My opinion is the dude's a killer singer. I think he's got a great voice. I think he does a lot of things very well. I'm not a huge fan of his music that I've listened to across the board, but everything that I've heard, I've gone, this guy really knows what's up when it comes to the technical process of singing. So I think if there were ever a singer that you could look at as an example of how to sing metal with good fundamental technique, Jorn Lande is definitely the way to go. He's got it going on. All the little stuff, even from that little vowel I mentioned, to the tonal consistency, to the breath support, to having such good breath support and posture that he can deliberately change it. Being able to maintain his intonation throughout all the raspy stuff is something a lot of singers have trouble with. Just really, really nice. The guy's a great singer. Probably one of the best singers that I have seen since I started this channel as far as pure technique. So that's it. If you guys have any more comments, please let me know. I'd like to know a little bit more about him. I did some research about his history in terms of the bands he's played with and the songs, his discography and the like, but I don't know a lot about his personal background. Did he get training? That kind of thing I really want to know, because I'd like to find out a little bit more about his approach and his method, because he's one of those singers I definitely think merits some extra study. I would love for some group to do a case study on his process of singing, because I think there's a lot to learn from whatever he's doing that metal singers could probably use. And he's made a career out of this. I mean, he's been doing it for at least, 25 years or so, 26 years, and he's held up relatively well, even into his 50s. We'll see what happens in the future. I don't know how much of a vocal decline we're looking at from his style, but up until 50, he's had a heck of a voice, and so it's really, really good stuff. You guys know that I do have a Patreon. I'll put the link in the description in the comments. I do offer voice lessons, and I have a booking client in the comments as well if you want to book a lesson, or you can reach out to me through email, which I'll put in the comments in the description as well. I'm also on Instagram. Look me up at Zach Ansley Vocals. I've just started doing that a little bit more frequently than I used to, and maybe you guys can hear me sing some more on there. I'll give some little pointers and warm-ups and stuff like that on there every now and then. And look out for a poll in the next few days. I'm going to try to set up a poll for next week's content, because you guys have been giving me some great feedback, and everything you guys have recommended for me to do has been excellent, and I really, really appreciate all of your support. All right, so I will see you all again next week. Take care. Bye.